Hello, good evening, good morning, or good afternoon to everyone that's joining our last webinar. We are the International Scientific Committee of Earth and Architectural Heritage of ICOMOS. I'm Amanda Rivera, Vice President of the Scientific Committee, and I will make a little presentation about it, and then I will introduce Jorge and Alyssa that will talk us today about landscape. So, committee of ICOMOS, that is the International Council of Monuments and Sites. It's a non-governmental organization which is dedicated to promote the application of theory, methodology, and scientific techniques to the conservation and scientific of the architectural and archaeological heritage. So we are, as ISCEAH, one of the 30 international scientific committees, and we are dedicated, as our name says, to earth and architectural heritage. In our committee, we are about 150 people, and we are organized in 5 different themes. One's that's dedicated to archaeology, in use, technology, seismic, and the landscape group that it's coordinated by Jorge Tomasi from Argentina. So now Jorge and Alyssa will talk us about their different perspectives of earthen architectural landscape. Well, Jorge will start. Jorge Tomasi is an architect, master in social anthropology, and doctor in geography. Senior research at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council in Argentina, the CONICET, working at the Laboratorio de Arquitecturas Andinas y Construcción con Tierra in Tilcara, Argentina. Is professor of Arte and Arquitectura Colonial at the Universidad Nacional de Jujuy, and teaches in different postgraduate courses. He is also a member of the Iberoamerican network PROTERRA, an expert member of ISCEAH and CIAV from ICOMOS. So thank you, Jorge, for being with us today. You can start sharing.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to everyone for your participation, for being here in this last webinar of the series of 5 we have had. And yes, as Amanda said, we are going to talk a little bit about this concept of landscape and how it is applied to earth and heritage, and how we are working on it on our theme since the last month. And well, with Alyssa, we are going to try to move between some conceptual approaches and some specific cases that can help us to illustrate some of the discussions we are interested in. But of course, the landscape theme has a history, because it started to work in 2008 with the work of many important researchers and friends also, like Jonathan Bell, Isabel Cannon, and Michelle Lawson. They have been working on different aspects around the concept of landscape and how to apply it. And it's necessary to say that it is an important discussion also in the broader field of heritage studies, with very important discussions nowadays, even in UNESCO and ICOMOS, beyond earth and heritage. Well, this group have been working on a review of the cultural landscape literature. They have done a survey around trying to map different kind of earth and cultural landscapes in relation to the CARTOTER initiative, and they have been advancing. We have been as a group on the first ideas towards the guidelines. During this cycle, which is finishing and starting again now in 2024, we are going to go deeper again on the conceptual framework to understand these earth and cultural landscapes. and also trying to create a publication, not maybe a definitive guideline, but more a set of ideas, of principles, of concept that would help us to think, okay, how could we approach to this concept? And maybe you are asking yourself about why to continue discussing the concept of landscape after so many years. Well, it is a concept which has some kind of false transparency. So there is an apparent consensus about what it means, but finally, it is not so clear. It's a naturalized concept that needs a review of the more recent geographical anthropological insights on the concept to go deeper on the history and how it operates in relation to its inheritance and the origin of this concept, in order to try to incorporate. We're going to talk a little bit about the colonization, but trying to incorporate other ontologies to give different perspectives on what landscape is. Of course, there are some official definitions of landscape from UNESCO that are in general related to the idea of combined works of nature and man. But what is nature is something that we need to discuss, because it goes through different cultural frameworks. And I think that this definition, the second one here, which was included in the World Heritage Papers in an issue related to landscapes, I don't know if it's working. I think it changed. Alyssa, it's still on screen?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint now. Yes, it's working.
It's working now? Okay.
Yeah, it's working.
This idea of landscape refers to a way of viewing the environment. And this is interesting because it incorporates a definition of landscape that includes the problem of a narrative. Because we have to realize that the concept of landscapes have an origin in the visual art, in the plastic art. We are not related to an image produced of some kind of external environment, especially from 16th century, and was applied particularly to represent and order trying to understand and decodify other societies. So the otherness is in the core of the concept of landscape, and was particularly applied to distant societies in a colonial context, like this painting of Gauguin, but also to the rurality, to the inside otherness in European countries, so that the rural areas in this changing Europe, like in this picture of Carlos de Hades, and a Spanish painter. So finally, the concept of landscape is related to perspectives. So it's not an objective representation of something that exists, but the creation of a reality through a particular ontology. So in that context, some elements are made visible and some others remain invisible. And there is a reason why we show some things and we hide others. So in that context, the concept of landscapes, it's a colonial concept. So emerge, start from a colonial vision of the world in relation to the production of the decoding narrative and otherness of distant societies, but also looking to a social change and the justification for the extraction of resources in local places in Asia, Africa, or Latin America. So in a way, landscapes historically have been images for domination and control. And I thought that it would be interesting to see it from a case in Latin America, quite close where I live. It's a place called Puna de Atacama. I am not going very deep on this case, just to show a couple of images. But this area, Puna de Atacama, is in the north of Argentina, close to Chile and to Bolivia, and it's particular because after the independence of the American states in the 19th century, it belonged first to Bolivia, then to Chile, and finally was incorporated in Argentina in the 20th century. So when it was incorporated to Argentina, the Argentinian state deployed a lot of state instruments to exercise control over the area, including the travel of scientists, officials, etc., to begin to build some narratives about this area. And some of the narratives that are very common in different places of the world include ideas of a, as you can see in this text, but by a Swedish anthropologist, Erik Boman, a lunar country. The nakedness of this nature is horrifying. Everything becomes gloomy, taciturn. One no longer looks. In other paragraph says, okay, European people cannot live here. So it's the idea of creating this area, this region as a desert. And as a desert, it can be transformed. So they create this idea of emptiness. I think that, again, it is not showing. Sorry. Here we are again. Okay. This invention of this area with an emptiness. There is nothing there. It is not even from the earth. It's a lunar place. But they talk about also the earthen architectures there, saying these ideas which are repeated in many places of the miserable adobe huts, the lack of everything that could be called as least comfort. They live in the most absolute lack of hygiene. Again, Alyssa, it's close.
Yes.
Don't know what's happening with my computer. Sorry for that. They're going back now. Okay, sorry. But this idea of emptiness about the landscape, but also of backwardness about the architecture. And you can say, okay, this was typical of the 19th century visions of places, but I think it's interesting to see how they continue today. And here you have the official tourism advertisements of this area by the local government of Jujuy in Argentina of the last year, 2022, where they show this landscape not as lunar now, but as Martian. So it's a place with no humanity at all, just an empty place with these people arriving there, looking for the resources that are in this place. So it's a Martian landscape. So this old idea of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century about the emptiness continue to be recreated today as a tourism concept to make people go to this pristine area to be visited. Of course, it is not an empty place. We are not going to talk a lot about this, but it's a pastoral landscape where a lot of households move constantly with their herds from different settlements scarce on the territory as the ones you can see in the images. But beyond the settlements, the earthen architectures, there are many places which are sacred, which are significant for local families. In a way that we can take the concept of Joan Noguet, which said that the landscape is a hotbed of lived places, full of meaning. So on the contrary of this colonial vision of a desert, it's a place plenty of significance. In a relational condition where human beings and other entities are in symmetric relations. But the problem is that this colonial concept of landscapes, these narratives are not just narratives, but they create material characteristic of landscapes, material characteristic of territories, material characteristics oriented to the extraction of resources. So these martial landscapes become a place for minery in huge scale, like this kind of extraction sites of lithium, for example, in the same area of the Puna of Atacama. So the emptiness, the idea of emptiness is sustained by, it's a concept that sustains the possibility of extract resources from the landscape. And of course, there is conflict. These are the conflict of this same year around the use of water in minery. So are we considering this kind of conflicts when we define landscape, or we continue to affirm this idea of the combined work of nature and man, hiding in a way the big conflicts we have in these landscapes as conflicts, tension are part of the different narratives with the defined landscape. So we need to think from our field, and that's what we are trying to do from the theme is, how do we as academic field cooperate to these colonial landscapes, or how we can create other possible narratives oriented to the decolonization of landscapes, to consider a plural vision, a collaborative deconstruction, the repair of the colonial narratives, and a vision which could include a relational point of view of many entities. And now we're going to continue with the Alyssa presentation. Please, Alyssa.
Thank you, Jorge, for that very critical point of view. It's always very, very interesting. We will discuss at the end after Alyssa's presentation. So thank you, Alyssa. Alyssa Barry is, I will present her. So Alyssa Barry is a Senegalese architect and urbanism specialized in African cultural heritage. Currently based in Dakar, Senegal, she works as an independent consultant, providing support to national and international institutions in the development and implementation of projects and activities for the preservation, promotion, and enhancement of Africa's cultural heritage. She is also the current coordinator of the ICOMOS Emerging Professional Working Group for the Africa region, from ICOMOS EPW Working Group Africa. Thank you very much, Alyssa, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you, Jorge, for your introducing presentation. So my presentation today will be about a site called Kutamaku, the land of the Batamariba, which is an example of African cultural landscape. So as Amanda said, I'm an architect and urbanist specialized in African cultural heritage, and I've been introduced to this site of Kutamaku when I was working at UNESCO in Paris at the World Heritage Center. I've been very lucky to visit it because we were working on a conservation project there, and I visited it in 2019. So that's how I've met this beautiful site. So Kutamaku is located between Benin and Togo, which are two countries in West Africa, and is located in a mountainous region called the Atakora mountain range. It's a very vast site of almost 300,000 hectares. As you can see here on the map, there's a very small part in Togo and a very big part in Benin. So the site is called the land of the Batamariba because it's inhabited by the Batamariba people, which literally means those who shade the earth. They are said to have settled in the region between the 19th and the 17th centuries. They are organized in clans, and this name was given to them by the god, the creator god called Kuye, who is the one who created the takienta. And as we will see later, the takienta is the very typical house of these beautiful people, which is a house for both men and divinities and ancestors. This is what we will see now, because Kutamaku is first characterized by its tangible heritage, and more specifically the takienta, which I just spoke about, which is the house of the Batamariba people. So it's an earthen architecture house of 2 floors, in which the members of the families live, but also the ancestors and the animals. So in the last inventories, we noticed that there were more than 5,000 houses in Benin and almost 2,000 in Togo. You can see beautiful pictures of how the house looks like on the right, and also a drawing here. But Kutamaku is also a lot of intangible heritage, which includes beliefs and rituals, craft skills, dances, and songs. You can notice this from the way the Batamariba people build the house, the way it's organized. Here, for example, on the picture, you can see first here how it's organized, with on the west side all the living people. That's where the living people live, and on the east side, that's where the dead and the ancestors are located. On the left, you have the women, and on the right, you have the men. Here on the picture, you can see men building the house. Here, it's all the shrines that are dedicated to the ancestors and where they practice rituals in the name of the ancestors. And here on the left, it's all the dances that are associated with particular rituals and ceremonies. For example, ceremonies for the introduction of when girls become women and when boys become men. So it's very important for the Batamariba people. And in 2004, the site was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, but just for the Togo site. And very recently, this year in 2023, the Benin site also inscribed Kutamaku. So it's almost 20 years later. Now about the notion of cultural landscape. So Jorge already introduced about it, but it's very interesting because Kutamaku is inscribed on the World Heritage List as a cultural landscape. So it was very important for me to first look at this UNESCO definition of cultural landscape to see what they consider a cultural landscape. And UNESCO says that cultural landscapes inscribed on the World Heritage List are cultural properties that represent combined works of nature and of man, as Jorge said. They are illustrative of the evolution of human society and settlement over time under the influence of the physical constraints or opportunity presented by their natural environment and of successive social, economic, and cultural forces, both external and internal. I think it's very important because first it shows that it's both nature and man, but there's also the notion of time because it's a cultural landscape is supposed to be dynamic and to evolve with time and society, and I think it's very important. So in the definition, they also categorize cultural landscapes in 3 main types. The first one is the clearly defined landscape designed and created intentionally by people. The second time is the organically evolved landscape. And the third type is the associative cultural landscape. So I just put in red the organically evolved landscape because I believe that's where the Kutamaku fits as a cultural landscape. And so here are all the elements that makes it a cultural landscape. First, the fact that it's located in below the Atakura mountain range. There's also this notion of extent, because as I first said, it's located between Benin and Togo, without necessarily taking into account the colonial boundaries. The building materials are all from the environment, from the landscape. The architecture reflects the landscape, the agriculture and farming, and the ceremonies and rituals are all what makes Kutamaku a cultural landscape. But now, and this is the subject of our working group, how do we redefine cultural landscapes? And I think this was brilliantly introduced by Jorge in his presentation. First, you have to know that both Benin and Togo were colonized. Togo was first colonized by the German from 1884 to 1914. It was a German protectorate, and it was then called Togoland. Then from 1913 to 1916, it became a French-English condominium before being the French colony of Togo from 1916 to 1960. And as for Benin, it was colonized by the French from 1894 to 1860, and it was then called the Dahomey. And so, okay, so this is very interesting because first, you have to know that the Batamariba people are known to be a people that have always resisted centralized political systems and enslavement, whether from other kingdoms of West Africa or by the colonial administration. And the French colonizers in particular were calling them Somba in Benin or Tamberma in Togo, which are terms that are still used today, especially in the tourism industry. But these terms are very pejorative, very negative, because when the colonizers used these terms, it was referring to populations that were considered savage or archaic. And this was because they could not really control them. They were very resistant. So here on the right, you have some adjectives that you can find about the Batamariba people when you look at writings from the anthropologists of that time. So that's how they refer to the Batamariba people. They say that they are the ones who walk naked, the ones who with strange ornaments and customs, that they are fierce, that they are from the bush, that they are without clothing. They are Castle peasants. They live in primitive, picturesque landscape. They are anarchic. They are armed from head to toe with a wild and even frightening appearance, inferior to coastal populations as their nudity hinders their development. So there are very negative way of talking about the peoples, but on the contrary, when they speak about the houses, the takienta, they refer to it as castles, but always comparing them to French castles and diminishing them, saying, okay, it's like small French, they look like small French castles, they look like a primitive version, a middle age version of the European castles. So I think it's very interesting. And yes, maybe also compared to what Jorge spoke about. Now it also questions the question of the borders. So this is a publication that UNESCO recently launched called Managing Transnational UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Africa. And the initial goal of the publication is to showcase what they call transboundary and transnational cooperation, shared responsibility, international solidarity and cooperation, interculturalism and dialogue. But I think the real question here, and with this particular example of Kutamaku, and I think there are a lot of cases like this in Africa, is how do we really challenge the colonial border, and could we maybe use the notion of cultural landscape to try to not erase, because it's maybe not possible to erase, but at least to question and to challenge these borders that were arbitrarily drawn by colonizers, and bring together these people that was separated by these borders, but in fact, even today still live the same way from one border to the other, and have the same practices and culture. Maybe this is also a way to think and to look at the notion of cultural landscape. And lastly, how do we adapt to modern times? Like the definition, the UNESCO definition says, cultural landscapes are something that is always evolving with time. And today, that's what we see with Kutamaku as well. Like you can see here on the picture, just you have from one side the traditional takientas, the traditional architecture, but just on the side, they are building in a modern way. And in some cases here, you can see that the takientas are well preserved, but in some cases, they are just rooms, but they are still using these rooms just to pay tribute to the ancestors. So how do we, what does it mean today? Because when you look at, for example, UNESCO, they consider that these are affecting the property. Of course, today, there are less and less available traditional materials. People, they don't want to live in these houses anymore. They want to live in a modern way. There's also the question of the management. How do we manage a site when it's located in two different countries, and when the people, the cultures, the beliefs, the way of living are the same from one side to the other? How do we tackle the question of urbanization, which is in the case of Kutamaku just close to the site and is coming to the site? How do we tackle the question of climate change? For example, in 2018, there were very heavy rains that destroyed a lot of these houses, and that's when I was involved in this project, in this conservation project. It was just after this heavy rain, and of course, with climate change, there will be more and more of this kind of raining. So I think it's also a way to think on how, with cultural landscape, we can tackle all these issues and respond to all these questions. So here it is. I think Kutamaku is a very great example of cultural landscape that also helps us to raise all the questions that I think as a working group for ICOMOS we have to think about. And I think that was the idea of Jorge, and I'm very, very happy to be part of the group, and I hope we can really do great things to respond to these questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alyssa and Jorge. Indeed, the two cases are in the same perspective now. This, how do we, through landscape, question these colonized borders, or not only by European colonies, but also today's administrative borders, right? In South America and in Africa, there are free countries now, but they have these borders that are very artificial for these cultural unities at the end. So it's a very interesting contrast also. So we invite now everyone that is here, if puts questions or to comment also, because the idea of these webinars are not only to present, but to discuss. Maybe there are people that were saying that are connecting from different parts of the world, from Turkey, from the US. I see some people from Morocco, from Colombia. So maybe there are also examples of these, of like this that you will like to share. I don't know, we open the discussion for everyone to, there's a question. Well, I will put the question, so maybe others will, or maybe Veronica, you want to do it yourself? Veronica Rosa.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit sick. Yeah, so thank you for the really useful, interesting presentation. This issue with this colonial narrative has been present and at least addressed already for long, but my interest is in how has this this narrative and this perspective and this consequent persistent stigmatization of earth and heritage has impacted the way we perceive it in a modern world and in the midst of the current global issues that we're facing. And currently there has been a reborn in the interest of earthing architecture and how climate positive this way of doing architecture is, but still is not mainstream. And it definitely has to do with this narrative that has been constructed around it. So I was wondering if Jorge has some insights regarding that, how these narratives has impacted the potential or the ability to mainstream this way of doing architecture and the way we see these landscapes in the midst of the urgent need of the transformation in the built environment.
Thank you, Veronica. You are going to help me also, but I think that, of course, there is a chance of earth and architectures to not to change the world, but to move forward a more sustainable approach to architecture, of course. But at the same time, I think there is a risk of how the persistence of these colonial narratives makes a use of earth and architecture techniques today by certain parts of society with high incomes, the process of appropriation of these techniques to be used in a particular way. At least where I live, but maybe Amanda also in San Pedro de Atacama in Chile, in the north of Chile, but also in many countries, it's ironic, but earthen techniques like Adobe, for example, remains as a technique for high income people, while other part of the society with no so much incomes, they cannot afford the use of earthen techniques. So I think that we need to think sustainability in a broader perspective, not just considering the environmental challenges, but also the social sustainability of practices. And that requires a change of the perspective of our landscape. Necessary.
That's very interesting because it's very ironic, I believe. But it's always said that the earth and architecture is for poor, or it's like for. I've heard a lot in Europe, third world countries kind of architecture, but at the same time today, it's you have to have a lot of money for that, right? Because you want something durable, even though it's made, even though you never want to touch earth because it's dirt. Or so there are many things that we need to. Yeah, so it's complicated. It has many different perspectives and many different ways to see. So I think it should also be, as Jorge said, a very complex new view, not only this ecological movement that is erasing earthen architecture, but also cultural. Where is it appropriated to do something and where is it not? So and also to understand when there's something that's made before you arrive, how was it done? Why was it done? It's very easy, even if we arrive to another context and to judge, like from our point of view, to take that out of our being. It's something that we should do at the beginning, because obviously if we go, I don't know, I'm from Chile, and if I go to Europe or even to Africa, I will see from my point of view. How can we just start changing that and to understand the others so we can break this colonization? Because even we have a little bit of that, right? When we judge others' cultures. So this is something that we have to work on, and these meetings are for that, right? To understand others' perspectives and to discuss a little bit about this. Maybe Alyssa, you want to say something about?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question. I don't know about Latin America, but in Africa, when you speak about earthen architecture, it's considered primitive. So I think it's very important, it's very urgent now that we reverse the narrative of the colonizers, because I think that's when it started. When I was showing all the terms that were referring to the Batamariba people in the literature, that's how they would perceive the people, and that's how they would perceive architecture, and to the point that today people here in Africa, they consider that earthen architecture is for primitive people and that they don't belong, they don't deserve to live in this kind of architecture. So I think it's really our responsibility to reverse this narrative and to show all the richness and all the qualities of earthen architecture. I think it's really our role and our mission.
I hope it's not going to happen in Africa. What is actually happening in Latin America is that this paradox that Amanda mentioned, that both things happen at the same time. So earthen techniques are prohibited in certain contexts, in particular for indigenous communities, local population, etc. And at the same time are the techniques used for very expensive hotel, tourist activities, etc., or houses for weekends of certain families. So both things happen at the same time. So in a way, the earthen architecture is not the colonial itself, but we need to look at earthen heritage and earthen architecture in the decolonial way to change perspectives, because we can sustain coloniality through earthen architecture also.
That is very interesting, because sometimes above all, the people that worked inside the earthen architecture thinks that the material are the solution, like only the material, without the context, and that's something also to question, right? Because it doesn't work everywhere. It doesn't work the same way in every context. So understanding the context, and in that sense, landscape can play a very important role, because where is it placed, where this technology is placed, that it's because it's a part of a system, it's a part of an ideology, it's a part of a way of living. So that to question that, the abstraction of only the technique, of only the material, is also this part of this decolonization at the end. So I don't know if anyone else wants to make another question. There's a question for Alyssa. I don't know if you want to make it yourselves, Sarafadin? Or, well, I can read it.
Hello.
Oh, yes, please. Go ahead.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. So my question is to Alyssa. So I was just wondering, through your involvement in the project with the Batumariba people, did you find that perhaps they are trying to, for some of the castles, for some of the built structures that are getting dilapidated, did you find that perhaps they are trying to use local knowledge to try and restore? Or do you find the trend of increasingly many people are abandoning the earthen architecture for modern brick and mortar structures? So yeah, because I was thinking that because they built these structures, they might have some forms of knowledge that we could build upon and develop for the future because of the increasing challenges of climate change and extraction from the earth and things like that. And so that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So unfortunately, from what I saw and what I read and what I know, there are more and more leaving these traditional houses to build more modern houses. But the good point is that they still want to have the old house as a way to do all the rituals to the ancestors. So you would find all traditional houses, even if they are in ruins, just next to more modern houses, and they would prefer living in the modern houses and use the traditional ones just to do the rituals and the ceremonies for the ancestors. So that's really sad, because the knowledge associated to the construction of the taquientas is dying, because they don't really want to build new house or to renew it. They would just use it to do the rituals and traditional practices, unfortunately.
And in the same direction of that question, when they do the rituals, they don't maintain the constructions. They can be undone, like.
Yes, because the most important things for the rituals, I don't know if you show in the picture, but it's the shrines that are located just at the entrance of the house. So this is the most important part for them. So it doesn't, the whole house doesn't need to be functional, you know. They all need to be sure that the shrines are well preserved, because that's where the ancestors are located in. So that's the most important part of the house for them.
And the modern houses, the contemporary houses, are always made in what materials? So
they are more and more using cements, with steel for the roof, and also
so cement blocks.
Yes, cement blocks, more and more. And there's also the fact that the traditional materials are less available now with climate change and all this, and that it's easier to maintain to them, because with earthen architecture they have to redo it after each rainy season. It's a lot of work that they are not really willing to do anymore with modernization and, you know, new activities. So that's a real issue.
In some places, I've heard, like, also rich people could afford earthen houses because of the maintenance. Like for people that work to eat, one day of working at your house, it's one day you don't get to work for eating. So it's a very complicated situation. Like
exactly, and there's also the fact that traditionally you would read all the so after each rainy season, and it's like that in a lot of African countries. I see that Abdullah is here from Mali. He can testify it's the same in Mali, but after each rainy season, it's really a collective work to rebuild all the houses. But now with the society, people don't have time to do this, you know, collective works. Like each person has their own duties and things to do for a living. So it's also things that we have to take into account when we speak about cases like this. It's also part of the issues, I think, because for us it's really easy to say, oh, we have to preserve this, we have to make sure that, you know, people maintain these traditions and constructions, but there are also the realities of the difficulty of life, and I think it's very important to remind this as well.
Yeah, also just to put it like a subject.
May I
Yes,
make another comment? Because our last meeting as themes, of course, we are all invited. Who are not participating now on the landscape theme are invited, of course. But on our last meeting with the presentation of Julieta Varada, who is here, we discussed a lot about the problem of change. Because there's something to think about in theoretical terms, because of course that as Alyssa said, the concept of landscape is evolving landscapes, evolving relations. So it's supposed that the dynamicity of landscape is part of the definition, but it seems at the same time that authenticity is a very strong principle. So it seems that this change, there is a change allowed and a change not allowed, or a supposed change. So sometimes when we are so worried, and it happens to me also, about some changes, okay, we need to think about it, because this architecture maybe that was shown by Alyssa started someday, and they have been modern in a way in some moment, and now we are trying to preserve them. And maybe life is on the move always, and we have to reconcile ourselves with the concept of change in local places. All changes, I don't know, but because some are because of inequality, etc. And okay, we have to discuss it, but I think that sometimes we have a big problem about change of landscapes and life change that's have been always changing.
Well, I think the concept of change generally in heritage is something very conflicted, because it affects the definition of heritage. Like, so it's a complicated thing, and then it's also complicated to define it from the outsider, you know, because it's something that should be defined by communities itself. From my point of view, even though we have to work it theoretically to have a consensus, like an international consensus, that it's part of our duties. Or how do we work in this intellectual consensus to be as open as we can, right? To make a place for local people for their own definitions. So it's something very complicated, because it has borders now that are defined and are usually defined by European institutions, colonization, yeah, institution also, even ours, even ICOMOS, it was born in Europe, so it has a lot of these things that we need to question. So this is the idea or the focus of this group and of this discussion now, right? It's something, I think it's a duty from overall from us that have been involved in these definitions. Like we've been named after, I don't know, even our continents have been named after others, right? So these questions are very important. So thank you very much for starting this, and of course for continuing this. I don't know if anyone has any comments or other questions.
I think I just wanted to ask if the project Alyssa is working on, if it's still an ongoing project or it's been concluded.
Okay, so in the meantime, I left UNESCO, so I don't know where they are now. But from what I was seeing and from what I was doing, the first phase of the project was over. So we documented the process of how they build the house. And now I think the next phase is to try to use the recommendation on the historic urban landscape to see how we can try to sort of control the urbanization that is about to touch the site, to make sure that the urbanization doesn't affect the conservation of the site, using the recommendation 2011 recommendation on historic urban landscape. So I know this was supposed to be the next phase. I don't know if it has started yet. But the first state about the reconstruction of all the houses that were damaged by the heavy rains, and the documentation process and how to traditionally build the taquientas has been done already. You're welcome.
And is there a place where there is this information?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was the document. It was published by Crater. So okay. Maybe I can find the link and send it in the chat.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. That would be interesting.
Okay, I just put in the chat.
Great. Well, thank you, Alyssa, once again, and thank you, Jorge, for today's for the talk and the presentations, and thank you all that have assisted to this webinar series. Thank you very much. See you next year.
Thank you, Amanda, for the organization, for the effort, for everything, and for the opportunity to present us. Thank you, Alyssa also, for our joint work.
Yes. I hope it can continue with more connection between Latin America and Africa. I think it's very interesting.
It is indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank
goodbye.
You to all.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.